Hello! Welcome to the very first episode of A Dummy's Guide to Life and Liberty. I'm your host, Paul Muovi. Of course, I do realize that I am the dummy here, but I am an old dummy and I have seen a lot of change in my time and have had more than a few hands up my backside. So I thought I would share my thoughts and observations with you with the help of my almost useless human helper. I am lacking the necessary musculature to move all by my lonesome, and I believe that would creep many of you out anyway. That said, you probably want to know what we will be discussing on here. Well, life and liberty. Duh. It's in the title. Yes, it can be a serious topic, but I find it funny that humans have become so serious lately. When I was molded, people still had a sense of humor. So here I am trying to inject a little comedy into the fray. This episode is really more of a ground rules and expectations party. Yeah, I know it doesn't sound fun, but that's not my fault. Current culture has forced me to take the position of explaining rules for viewing, and disclaimers and caveats and all that. Again, not my fault. I'm sure in future episodes I will be forced to refer people back to this episode for re-education, so to speak. I mean, seriously, look at the news today. I realize that the actual year 1984 is in our past, but the Orwellian 1984 is now. Groupthink, memory hole, rewriting the language, 2 plus 2 is 5, thought police. Well, maybe not yet here in the US, but certainly there are politicians clamoring for it. To what end? Who supports this type of dystopia? 1984 was a warning, not a political blueprint. Those that support this ideology obviously haven't read Orwell's Animal Farm. It's not like I was unhappy hanging out in the bottom drawer of the dresser, but my stupid human was always listening to the news with the volume on high. I swear the man needs hearing aids or headphones. Anyway, it became painfully apparent that it was time for me to share some wisdom. Plastic lasts a long, long time. Okay, let's start with ground rule number 1. On being offended. First and foremost, you cannot be offended on anyone else's behalf. That's just lame. Sure, you could not like it personally, but to be offended? Really? You can't eat for others. You can't poop for others. Being offended for others is on the same level. Okay. Now I have to address the problems with being personally offended. There are 3 basic possibilities. First, if I say something you think is offensive, ask yourself, is it true? Think of it like a logic tree. If it is true and you don't like it, change it. For instance, I've been called a dirty dummy. I looked at myself and my clothes and I could see that yes, I am a dirty dummy. But nothing a good bath and a load of laundry couldn't fix. Problem solved. Whatever your deal is, it sure isn't my fault. Now, if it is something that you don't like but cannot change, learn to understand that it is part of who you are, and this statement may even prove to be an asset to you and is likely to be part of your journey in this life. As an example, being called a dummy is something I get called all the time. Geppetto didn't make me. I don't know Jiminy Cricket, and wishing upon a star is not going to change a damn thing, so here I am. I can't help you there either, so deal with it. Last, and most obviously, is the statement false? If it is indeed false, then how in the world can you be offended? If you're offended by untrue statements, then perhaps you should refrain from participating in the human race. Find a bottom drawer and lay there until you grasp that not being offended by non-applicable statements is a logically and rationally controllable situation. Again, I can't help you with that. Hopefully, that helps. I know that I shouldn't have to state it at all, but I am exhausted from hearing all the outrage of people being offended. Well, I guess I have to address the other major pet peeve of mine. I think it's the whole reason I had to go in the bottom drawer to start with. Again, really simple concept. Really simple. Are you ready? I don't want to have to repeat myself. My human has his hand at my backside and it's starting to get sweaty. Ground rule number 2. I will often speak in generalizations. It's faster and easier. I do not want to have to make disclaimers every time I make a statement. Even though I am a dummy, a mere piece of plastic, I am acknowledging from here forward there are exceptions in almost everything. Statistically insignificant exceptions exist. I get it. Your cousin's friend did something that is an exception. You're the one of 2.6 billion humans with A, B, C, D exponent blood type. Qualifying every single statement will make my jaw fall off. Literally. So let's dispense with that crap now. Are you on board? Can I move forward? I appreciate your understanding. Alright, last major one for this episode. Major. Seriously major. Pay attention. This is related to the previous point, but I wanted to make it a separate point because a lot of people get hung up on this. And sometimes they even get offended. See point 1. Alright, ground rule number 3. People use stereotypes. Me too. I see a guy with sweaty hands, I pretty much assume that my back is going to get wet. Instinct. Probably. Yes, that's a concern for a dummy like me. And yes, it is a stereotype. Even though not every sweaty hand up my back has been stinky and unpleasant, there have been a majority mind you, that fit that description. Now, we all judge by our experiences, right? It's really a survival mechanism. Basic, very, very basic. Let's take an example that can make sense to everyone. Way back in history, prehistoric actually, there were a couple of cavemen that saw a saber-toothed tiger. It looked soft and smooth while it was sleeping. Thak decided to go and touch the soft fur. Glag watched from the cave. The saber-toothed tiger woke up as Thak was stroking his fur and proceeded to rip him to shreds while Glag watched in horror. Now, Glag liked being alive. His assessment of the bloody scene stayed in his memory, and it was subconsciously filed away as saber-toothed tigers are dangerous. Glag lived a long time and shared his stories so others would not have to suffer Thak's fate. Of course, there may be some very sweet and not ragingly vicious saber-tooths, but he wasn't interested in finding out which ones were of that demeanor. Being wrong was way too high of a risk. Of course, the opposite is true. If there was fruit that tasted good, they were likely to assume that they were going to enjoy the experience. Now, not all fruit is the same ripeness or flavor, but based on experience, they would take the fruit and try it. This is how they learned to feed themselves and survived to move the human race forward. Stereotypes are based on some simple truths. People are by necessity required to make judgments based on experience to survive. Not a rocket science concept here. Now, we have to address stereotypes regarding people. Even as a dummy, I feel stupid for having to do this. I mean, seriously dumb. But again, not my fault. To keep the really simple, very, very simple, I will be showing images of people. If it were a test, a 3-year-old should be able to pass this part. Were you able to identify all the people in those images? Basketball player, doctor, baseball player, fireman, baby, jihadist. Okay, so maybe a 3-year-old wouldn't get jihadist, but could probably say bad guy. However, in the interest of keeping this a positive program, I will just say that you were able to do so. That's the identification phase. Here's where the whole thing gets tricky and your subjectivity is outside my purview. Part of identifying and evaluating an object or person includes a subconscious threat level attached to it. subconscious. Now, why is this point so incredibly important? It's that damn survival mechanism again. How so, you ask? Well, let me share with you another example and why it is subjective. Remember this cat? In our first example, Glad watched his friend get shredded by this furball with daggers. He has an opinion of this creature, to be sure. Not a good opinion either. Well, Glag, in his travels, has been out warning other cavemen that this is an animal that is very dangerous. Of course, his sample size may be small, but what a first impression. And you can never make another first impression. After a while of spreading his personal experience with the caveman community, he meets Tolka. Now, Tolka has been raising a saber-toothed tiger that was found as an incredibly small kitten. Tolka's cat is very tame. Domesticated, so to speak. Glag understandably freaks out upon seeing the saber-toothed tiger near and keeps his distance, even with the assurance of Tolka. Glag's panic seems entirely unreasonable to Tolka, but here, Tolka's sample size is also small, and Tolka's first impression is non-threatening. Same type of animal, two polar opposite opinions. Who's right? Who's wrong? Well, let's take this relationship out over a longer period. Glag and Tolka travel together and come upon another saber-toothed tiger. Glag manages to keep Tolka back to observe. What do they see? They see that tiger attack another caveman and watch as the caveman gets shredded as in Glag's first encounter. Now, Glag's position is reinforced, and Tolka has to reconcile that he is torn on the entirely different behaviors. This generates some discussion and disagreement between the two. At this point, Glag has seen the majority of saber-toothed tigers behave aggressively and believes that they are inherently dangerous. Tolka has a split experience. They begin to debate the nature of the tigers. More run-ins with the tigers soon generates a larger pool of data suggesting that saber-toothed tigers are indeed inherently dangerous and need to be respected as such. Even Tolka can see that this is the case because the majority of the data supports Glag's assertion. Thus, Tolka and Glag deduce that the reason Tolka's tiger is not bloodthirsty is because it was raised differently, a cause and effect, if you will. This is the noted exception. Stereotypically, saber-toothed tigers eat cavemen. Survival instincts kick in. Again, I will assume that you find this example suitable for explaining why generalities and stereotypes are used. Everyone does this. Everyone. Even as a dummy, I recognize this, and my life isn't on the line. Yeah, no pulse. Not super concerned about dying. You know, even that being the case, I still wouldn't stick my head in a blender. I'm just saying, I've seen what blenders do. Stereotypically. Well, now, I think Mr. Sweaty Palms is getting tired of making my mouth move. So this looks to be where I say goodbye. Until next time, keep your mind open and maintain perspective.